what do we all want? What shows that our society is working and our role in that society is working is that our kids will do better than us. That's the basic compact. That's the basic agreement we all hope to have. When we shake hand with our society, we're hoping to come to a deal that says, if I'm a good citizen, if I play by the rules, a little bit of luck, I'm going to be able to afford the opportunities to my kids so they can do better than me. And for the first time in American history, that compact has been broken.
Business Casual.
Today's guest is a special one for the show. Scott Galloway, best-selling author, NYU Stern professor, podcast host, was actually Business Casual's very first guest way back in September of 2019 when he talked about the need to break up big tech. Well, a lot has changed since then, even though still no one has solved how big tech should be regulated. As we continue to deal with the effects of the pandemic, we're facing some pretty big challenges, like the state of our economy as we stare down a looming recession and record inflation, questions around a burgeoning and sometimes problematic attention economy, a mental health crisis, still the power of big tech, and the list is endless. Sometimes it just feels like the world sucks a little bit, or a lot. Scott Galloway has a new book laying out what sucks and what doesn't. It's called Adrift, America in 100 Charts, which elucidates the state of the country and provides context through a series of illustrative charts. Scott argues that America is at a crossroads and on the brink of massive change. So we got his take on a lot of topics that are on the brink. We also got into what he thinks about the changing relationship between work and non-work life and the value, in his opinion, of going into an office, especially early in your career. If you're young and capable, he says, think of the office as a feature and not a bug. One topic that Scott has opined on a lot over the years is social media. You'll have to listen to the rest of the episode to hear his latest take, but one sort of surprising and refreshing thing he said was this. Scott Galloway is trying, pretty recently, not to argue with strangers on the internet anymore. More of that attitude, please. Scott, there's about 1 million topics that I want to get to. But first, we like to start this podcast with an icebreaker.
Okay.
For a segment called OG Occupations. Scott, what was your first ever job you've ever had?
I used to walk a Great Dane. I was about 90 pounds. The dog was 170. His name was Thor. And the biggest gift to myself, or the most indulgent gift, I've always wanted a Great Dane. They're a difficult breed because they don't live very long. They have hip problems, and they're just exceptionally large. But as a gift to myself, my whole life I've wanted a Great Dane. Anyways, as a birthday gift to myself, a year ago I got a Great Dane. So my first job was walking a Great Dane, and now I have a Great Dane.
Oh my gosh! Did you ever get dragged by the Great Dane that was so much larger than you?
Oh no, it was super gentle, and I don't know if you're into dogs, Nora, but Great Danes are just giant, mushy pillows of emotion and affection. They just want to, I'm really into dogs, and I have a small dog. I have a rescue, and small dogs are very purpose-driven. They're like basically purses with personality. They come up to you and they say, let's play, let's eat, and then they go and they sleep. Great Dane just sits on your lap and says, let's just love each other and occasionally take breaks for snacks. They're just so emotional. Perfect. But yeah, my first job was walking a Great Dane. There
was also, according to a recent New York Times story about you this summer, your first job out of college was at Morgan Stanley, and you said you had gotten it because, A, you were a personal trainer for someone at Morgan Stanley, but you also said that you lied about your grades. Have you ever lied on your resume since then, or that was the last time?
No, so this podcast is the reason I can never run for senator. No, I lied. I had a 2.27 GPA at a UCLA, and I lied about my grades. And the reason I accepted a job with Morgan Stanley, just to dig the hole even deeper, was I heard they didn't drug test, and the only thing I really did in college was watch Planet of the Apes and smoke a shit ton of marijuana. So, I didn't deserve that job for a lot of reasons.
But it's okay. it's gotten you to where you are now. Just one little lie
out.
didn't hurt anyone
Worked
at the
out.
end of the day. Well, Scott, I would like to give our listeners a little bit of a heads up on the topics we're going to cover, because there's just, so much that we can talk about with you. So first, I would love to touch on work-life culture. It's a topic that comes up a lot in this podcast, highly relatable to our listeners. Then a little bit on marketing and social media. Obviously, that's, your expertise. And we have a lot of marketers who are our listeners as well. And then we'll get into your book, Adrift, America in 100 Charts, which itself covers dozens of topics. So first on work life, I have been thinking about identity a lot and being defined by your career and your work. You wrote recently, work has been the most important thing in my life. It's my identity and has been the greatest source of reward. And you admitted that this mindset is both dysfunctional and American. How has your perspective changed over time on your relationship between your work and your identity?
Well, as you get older, hopefully your identity gets a little bit more nuanced and has more texture, and you start to identify yourself through your relationships and your citizenship, and how good you can be to the people around you and some of the qualities you admire in yourself. So hopefully that identity becomes more nuanced. I'm still a believer that in a capitalist society, America becomes more like itself every day, and that it's a loving and generous place for wealthy people. We talk about our healthcare crisis. If you're in the top 10%, healthcare is absolutely nowhere better in the world in terms of your rights, your liberties, your ability to pursue justice, be the person you want to be. This is hands down the best place in the world for most of us, and absolutely the best place in the world for the upper decile. We have decided capitalism essentially says we believe in winners and losers, mostly based on some influence. There's different currencies of power, but the ultimate currency in America is currency, specifically money. And I think it's very important for young people, while they have the energy, while they have the physical stamina, and before they have dogs and kids, to be very focused on work and trying to set a trajectory for being really good at something such that they can have the marketplace leverage to establish economic security. I'm not saying be Monty Burns and have no life and just be focused on being a millionaire, but I think that if you have kids and you're stressed economically, there's science that shows that kid will have a higher resting blood pressure, that poverty and lower middle income to lower income families are just less healthy. And we don't like to talk about this because there's this myth that rich people foment when they speak to business schools that they don't think about money, which is just total bullshit. That's like saying Rafael Nadal doesn't think about tennis. If you want to be economically secure, you need to be financially literate. You need to know how much money you have. You need to have a financial plan. You need to understand your investments. You need to be thinking about it a lot. And I grew up without a lot of money, and I was very focused at a very early age on having economic security. And I think it was a blessing for me. I had a health crisis in my family. My mom became very ill, and it was very upsetting and emasculating as the only child and the son that I couldn't take care of my mom to the same extent I wanted to. And I remember just thinking, I wish I had more money. And so for the first time in my life, in graduate school, I just got very focused. So I advise young people that, be a DJ, design a fashion brand on weekends, but chart a path to being outstanding at something that people will pay you for. And I had very little balance when I was your age, Nora, and as a function of that, I have a lot of balance now. So you can have it all, you just can't have it all at once. And I would argue that you want to burn a lot of fuel in the inner atmosphere to get to light speed. I have an easier time making money now because I'm in space and I have some reputation and some capital to invest, and I can, on a small amount of thrust, go a long way. Young people, to establish yourself, figure out what you're wanting to do, get the contacts, the currency, the relationships, the momentum, you have to burn a lot of fuel. And my advice to people when they're young is to burn a lot of fuel. Having said that, if you decide you don't want to live to work, you want to work to live, fine. Move to a lower cost area, adjust your quality of life in terms of the economic expectations. I think there is nothing wrong with that. But most of the young people I deal with expect to be, when you ask them how much money they expect to be making in 10 years, they usually want to be in the top 10%, if not the top 1%. And some of that is proximity bias because I'm at a business school where there's a lot of very ambitious people. But I've never known anyone who hasn't been smart enough to inherit wealth. That's the smartest strategy. But if you're not smart enough to be born into money, that if you want to get there, that hasn't worked their ass off and sacrificed a lot. And I'll finish my word salad by just saying, I did nothing but work for 20 years. Yeah. It cost me my hair. It cost me my first marriage, and it was worth it.
It was worth it. Wow. Okay.
It was worth it.
And one thing that you advise young people to do as well, in terms of, burning that fuel, work super hard early on, is to work in an office if you can. You've said remote work for young people is often a bad idea. The office is where you build relationships and find mentors. So what do you think is the value of working in an office versus working remotely, particularly for people who are very early on in their careers?
There's some nuance here. I think remote work, first off, we're not going back to the before times. The notion that we're going to get up, as I did at Morgan Stanley right at UCLA, and nurse my hangover and figure out a way to be in the office by 8:55 and put on a tie and get to the 55th floor of 1251 Avenue of the Americas, spend 8 minutes from the time you enter the building to getting to my desk, and not leave the office until everyone senior to me had left the office. You literally weren't allowed to leave.
I feel you, Scott. I started my career at Goldman Sachs, and you are speaking my language. Yeah, you have to get in before everyone else gets in, nurse that hangover, and wait until everyone else leaves.
Everyone's
and then you
gone.
Can depart. Everyone's gone.
I think there's certain industries that are going to demand full time, and obviously service workers have to be physically there. But I think we're going to hybrid. I think it'll be 3 days a week on average, 2 or 3 days. If you're trying to figure out what's going to happen or where the end state will be. Now, that will have huge ramifications because you're talking about a gross demand destruction of an asset class that's multi-trillion dollars called commercial office space of 40%. So you might see the GDP of Germany move from commercial real estate to residential because what everyone else is also deciding is that ratty rug is now intolerable because I'm sitting at home so often. Now, where it gets nuanced is the following. I think hybrid work or remote work is an enormous unlock for our society. And I think we should have a new classification of worker, loosely called a care worker. And that is if you have young kids at home and you're the primary caregiver, if you're taking care of an aging parent, if you are struggling with a mental or physical health issue, I'd like to think the companies see the social value and the opportunity to access labor force and offer them the opportunity to save 5 or 10 hours a week by not putting on a pantsuit, blow drying their hair, getting on the Long Island Railroad and getting into work. That's just an enormous unlock, and it's the right thing to do for people who really need those hours to raise healthy, secure, confident children and to take care of an increasingly aging population. So I'd like to see some sort of, I don't know if it's regulation or general gestalt that says women with young kids, a guy who's taking care of his father with dementia, we're just going to be as generous as we can trying to figure out a way to adapt to a flexible work schedule. Now, the final layer of this is the following. I think when you're young, especially young men, I think you need to learn how to read a room. I think you need to learn how to work in a team. I think you need the guardrails of knowing, okay, I can't get that fucked up tonight because I got to be up at 7:30. I've got to figure out a way to temper my emotions. I've got to figure out a way to make allies. I've got to figure out a way to find mentors. I've got to figure out the confidence to ask people for help. All of these wonderful things happen when we get together. And a wonderful place for people to get together traditionally has been in the office. I think it's a great place to find mentors, a great place to make friends, a great place to meet mates, potential mates. And I worry that young people, without that bumping off one another, are really losing out on what is the key to our species and happiness, and that is relationships. So, a huge unlock. We're not going back to the before times. But if you're young, I would just encourage you to try and think of the office as a feature, not a bug, and get into the office where you can find other ambitious young people and get to know them. I think it's a gift. I needed it. I needed it.
I did too. Early on in my career, it was very critical for me to have those relationships. We could have a whole episode just about the future of the workplace, but we have a lot of other topics to get to. On to marketing. At a recent conference for the digital advertising industry, you reportedly told the audience that most advertising sucks. So from your perspective as a marketing professor, what is the most wrong with advertising today? What are brands getting wrong?
Well, essentially, advertising has become a tax on the poor and the technologically illiterate. How do you know your life hasn't worked out the way you'd hoped? you're subject to a lot of advertising. If you're watching ad-supported TV, it probably means you're not making a lot of money. If you're technically sophisticated or making a good living, you can avoid most advertising. Between Spotify and Netflix, if you only let your kids watch Netflix and not ad-supported TV, they save 11 days in commercials, watching commercials a year. And what we found is that most programs, Modern Family, one of my favorite shows, they get 29 cents from you for interrupting you for 9 minutes. So if my time is worth, if it's 9 minutes of 29 cents of advertising, what that's basically saying is my time is worth $1.80 an hour. No, it's not. Most of our time, if someone said to you, here's 10 hours of advertising, you got to watch it and we'll give you $18, I just don't think very many people would take that deal. So what we've done is we've engaged in technologies where we pay streaming networks or Spotify a little bit of money or more money than that and said, just get rid of the advertising. That's the new compact. So most advertising, broadcast advertising doesn't work, isn't compelling, and people are opting out. Now, there's been a bit of a renaissance because so many people have abandoned ad-supported marketing that if you can find them, like on a podcast, you're probably getting really good CPMs in Morning Brew because people your age are really hard to find now because they're all taking their parents' Netflix account or they're phoning up and getting HBO Max. So there's a bit of an uptick because it's so hard for these advertisers to find that audience. But in general, advertising is a tax and people are figuring out a way to avoid it.
Well, you mentioned that broadcast advertising, TV advertising is so non-targeted, it feels pretty ineffective. But then you've got social media advertising, which is highly targeted and highly effective. And you've been very vocal about your distaste for social media broadly. So if social media is so critical to businesses as an ad platform, but so harmful to users, from your perspective, what exactly is the role of social media in society? This is a very big question. What do you think the role of social media should be in our society?
So I think we're net gainers. On the whole, I think we're net gainers from social media. I think we're net gainers from big tech. If someone could say, here's a button, you can get rid of all social media and all big tech, I wouldn't press it. Just as I think the problem is with the word net. I think we're net gainers from fossil fuels, but it doesn't mean we don't have emission standards. I think we're net gainers from pesticides, but it doesn't mean we don't have an EPA. So I think targeted advertising and using their full stack and their processing power and privacy is something that I think is mostly a chant by people over the age of 50 in Brussels and DC. I think we want our privacy violated as long as there's a coupon or utility at the end. What I am against is that an organization like Facebook or Meta shouldn't be able to serve a 14-year-old girl. There's a very famous case here, Molly Richards, who was starting to search out content on suicide and hurting herself, shouldn't be sending her images of pills, nooses, and razors. Pinterest should not be able to send her an email saying, here's a board on suicide you might like. That's an email she received from Pinterest. And they will throw up their arms and claim that these are really complex problems that we can't solve them, which is extraordinary bullshit. They can figure out exactly who she is and serve her exactly the right ad at exactly the right time, but they couldn't tell this was a young girl normalizing or getting content, pursuing content around self-harm. So anything that gets in the way of the scale of their revenues, they delay and obfuscate around. I think there should be carve-outs from 230 around health, around election misinformation, around vaccine misinformation. 230.
Can you just explain Section 230 real
quick?
Oh,
sure. Sorry. Section 230 was initially legislation that was meant to protect nascent platforms, which essentially says the platform isn't liable for the content put on that platform. Now, if I say something about Dominion voting machines that is not true and says that they're weaponized by Hugo Chavez, and it's not true and I knew it wasn't true, I am still liable, but Twitter might like that content because it's controversial and elevate it. Twitter is not liable. And it was meant for nascent platforms. It's totally outdated in my view, and it should be reformed. In addition, I think we should age-gate social media. We age-gate the military, alcohol, pornography, driver's licenses. I don't understand why any 14-year-old needs to be on social. So
what should the age be?
I don't know. I would want to get adolescent psychologists, or maybe even give them the opportunity to have a kid's version, but have it be just so. There's TikTok in China, but it's effectively all about Chinese pianists and academics and history. It's very much like, remember those books you used to get in school that were just hopeful and just very sort of very starched, clean and nice and aspirational? That's what their TikTok is. So I think there's solutions here. I don't know what the exact age would be.
Yeah. So you said enragement equals engagement, which brings me to a section in your book, Adrift, about the attention economy. So I'm just going to list out a few metrics for our listeners here. You wrote that YouTube videos identified as disturbing by users received 70% more views than the average video. You then cited a Wharton Business School analysis on which articles made the New York Times most emailed list. For every standard deviation increase of anxiety elicited, the probability of an article making the most emailed list went up by 21%. For awe, it went up 30%, but the most powerful emotion was anger, increasing virality by 34%. And then lastly, you cited an MIT study, which found that the time taken for falsehoods to reach 1,500 people was 6 times shorter than it was for the truth. So in summary, things that make us angry and feel bad, things that are untrue, things that those are the things that grab our attention and travel further, faster online. You mentioned, Section 230 needs to be revamped and there's, more regulation that's required. But do you think we can stop it? Can we change course for what does well on social media?
Well, I don't think you're going to eliminate it, but you could reduce it dramatically. I would argue that probably of the 6 times I've really been down or depressed in the last 12 months, it's usually one of 2 things. One of my kids isn't doing well, or something's happened on Twitter that's really upset me. Someone said something really vile, and I can't shake it. And then usually you find out that was a bot. I also think we should enforce identity, and that has I've gotten huge pushback for that because people bring up the notion that, well, a lot of people in emerging nations who would be punished for if their identity was known. But I think in a wealthy country, in terms of U.S. users, I think there should be absolutely greater identity enforcement. I think these platforms should be held accountable, but I also think we all have a responsibility, especially people who have a decent following, to just take the temperature down. And what I tell young people is, you don't have to respond to every slight. It's okay if occasionally someone gets the better of you.
I love hearing that you yourself, Scott Galloway, are taking the temperature down a little bit in terms of your interactions. Is this recent for you? This is kind of a new thing?
I'm really inspired by one of the wonderful things about teaching. I have just really some remarkable colleagues. And one of my mentors, even though I think he's younger than me, maybe he's a year older than me, is Jonathan Haidt. And I said to Jonathan, how can I play a role here? Because I want to and he said, well, we all have a role, and that is take the temperature down. He's like, I've just seen your Twitter feed. He's like, you like clapping back. And he's like, it's funny. It's fun to watch. But he's like, is it really helping? And he's right. And so I'm okay. If someone really comes after me and it's misinformation, it's a real account, I will try and respond thoughtfully that I think you're misrepresenting me, or here's my research on it, where's yours? Yeah. But I don't get back. I don't argue with strangers any longer. And I also don't try never to argue with anyone who's less powerful than me. The only time I'll ever say something back is when, I don't know, Elon Musk calls me names or something like that.
I feel like I saw an interaction maybe recently where you were actually kind of nice. He said something mean about you. You're like,
shocking.
I own Teslas. I like my Teslas.
Yeah, I own a Tesla. I sold it, by the way. I sold it. I thought, do I need to spend $120,000 on a product where the CEO calls me names? So I sold it. It's a great car. It's a great car.
So you took it offline, basically, to
that's
to
right.
fix it.
My revenge.
Okay, Scott, a little bit of a lightning round to hit on a bunch of topics from your book.
Sure.
First on tech and entrepreneurship, since we started touching on it. In chapter 3, called The Idolatry of Innovators, you discuss the risks of tech obsession and entrepreneur worship. Speaking of Elon Musk. So why is tech obsession and admiring someone like Elon Musk, for example, such a bad thing? What is at stake right now?
I think we have decided that these individuals get to play by a different set of rules. And also their companies aren't subject to the same scrutiny as other businesses. So power corrupts. I want Anthony Blinken or President Biden negotiating with Putin. I want NASA or the Defense Department deciding what communications technology gets turned off or on in Crimea, not a raging narcissist who has his head up his ass. So I find this dangerous that we have decided. Thomas Friedman predicted this 20 years ago, that these people were becoming so powerful, our idolatry and fetishization of them. They're the new Jesus Christ. Steve Jobs and now Elon Musk are the closest thing we have to a super being, and the guy could literally go out, could start killing puppies, and millions of people would say that it's good for the world,
for the cause.
So I think unelected people shouldn't be having negotiations with Putin. I think it's dangerous.
I have a lot of follow-up questions, but we're going to move on to the next topic because this is a lightning round. So on healthcare, in regards to healthcare cutbacks in modern history, you wrote, one change with profound long-term effects on our communities was cutting public mental health care. In the 1960s and 70s, a national movement to deinstitutionalize mental health patients drastically reduced the availability of psychiatric care. What are the economic implications here? And are there anything employers can do if governments aren't focusing so much on mental health care?
So the reality is we haven't cut expenditures. We've just reallocated them from mental health facilities to prisons. Most prison wardens will tell you that I now run a mental health hospital, not a prison. And so it's not like we thought cutting the cost would save money. It's just that we reallocated the expense to prisons. I think there's some very hopeful things. I think technology could be a huge unlock for mental health in the sense that pre-pandemic, 3% of doctor's visits were virtual. Now it's almost a third, and about 40 or 50% of those around mental health. And just as we destigmatize cancer, we're now mostly destigmatizing mental health. Although I would argue we've destigmatized it for women. I think if a senior level executive at a company who's a woman says, you know what, I'm feeling depressed, I'm kind of down, this is why, one of my parents is really sick or whatever it is, and they took some time off work, I think that would evoke a different reaction than if a senior level man said, I'm depressed and I'm down and I need some time off work. I think some other men around that person would go, well, maybe he's not up to the job. I think there's a different expectation from men or their willingness to, I don't know what it is, the patriarchy or this notion that at some point the kid has to be stopped being coddled by the mother. I don't know what it is, but men aren't comfortable talking about their mental health. But in terms of the expense of mental health, we haven't reduced the cost. We've just reallocated it from hospital and healthcare to our incarceration system. In terms of what companies can do, I think it's funding and encouraging, covering it in terms of health insurance and paying for mental health and recognizing that it's a thing. But I also think we have a huge role to play as a society and as parents. I try to be very open with my emotions. And I think it's okay to be sad. I think one of the biggest unlocks for a man, mostly men, is to really lean into your emotions. And from the age of 29 to 44, I never cried. I didn't cry once in 15 years. I didn't cry when my mom died. I didn't cry when I got divorced. I didn't cry when my businesses failed. I just forgot how to cry. And now I really lean into emotions and laughing out loud. And I find that if you don't do this, you lose touch with what's important to you. You lose touch with the people who are meaningful to you. You lose touch with the ability to discern what is really wonderful in your life. And so an enormous unlock for men, I think, is to lean into your emotions and really think about what is it about this situation that makes me so inspired I get emotional.
I know you're talking about men here, but it's funny. It's something I'm working on with my therapist is if I feel negative emotions, my instinct is to just get rid of it. Like, go away. I'm not going to feel it. So I'm working on trying to actually feel it, let myself cry, let myself experience it instead of just trying to remove myself from it. So I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, last lightning round topic on housing, very top of mind right now. And this, I think, will resonate with our listeners. For the first time, this is from your book, for the first time in U.S. history, young people are no longer better off economically than their parents were at the same age. An American born in 1940 had a 92% chance of doing better than his or her parents. Someone born in 1970 had a 61% chance. And a millennial born in 1984, who would be 37 today, only has a 50% chance of doing better than their parents. What does this mean for millennials and for Gen Z with career and home ownership aspirations and Gen Zers in the workforce? What are the implications here?
Yeah, you zeroed in on what is probably the most important chart in the book, and that is the whole premise of a society. We get caught up in the NASDAQ and innovation and disruption and salary and bonus and stock options. This is all a means to the end, and the ultimate end is that you want to live a productive life with someone you care about and have people that you can provide economic security and emotional security to. But that is reflected mostly, if you try to distill it down to one thing, what do we all want? What shows that our society is working and our role in that society is working is that our kids will do better than us. That's the basic compact. That's the basic agreement we all hope to have. When we shake hand with our society, we're hoping to come to a deal that says, if I'm a good citizen, if I play by the rules, a little bit of luck, I'm going to be able to afford the opportunities to my kids so they can do better than me. And for the first time in American history, that compact has been broken. And what's really tragic about it is there's no excuse for it because our GDP continues to grow, our productivity continues to grow, and the wealthy incumbents and people my age who have garnered a disproportionate amount of wealth, people over the age of 70 are 72% wealthier than they were 40 years ago. People your age, people under the age of 30 are 22% less wealthy. The percentage of wealth as a percent of GDP controlled by people under the age of 40 has gone from 19% to 9%. We have cut the wealth in the face of unprecedented prosperity of people under the age of 40 in half the last 40 years. And people say, well, it's network effects, it's globalization. No, it's not. What bullshit. It's purposeful legislation that takes money from young people and transfers it to old. The two biggest tax deductions in America are mortgage interest rate tax deduction and capital gains. Who owns homes and stocks? People my age. Who makes all of their money from current income and rents? People your age. And we have decided that you don't get the tax breaks we get. The largest transfer of wealth in the history of mankind happens every year. It's a $1.5 trillion transfer from young people to the wealthiest generation in history, old people, called Social Security. Why on earth would old people who have aggregated more wealth than any other cohort on the planet not be paying into something called Social Security tax and transferring money to young people? With the first two states in the presidential primary happen to be the oldest states in the union. So what do you know? Everyone talks about programs to give more money such that Nana and Pop can upgrade from Carnival to Crystal Cruises. There has been, income inequality gets a lot of warranted attention. What doesn't get enough attention is age inequality. We have basically said to a younger generation in so many words, fuck you, I got mine, you get yours. And we need to go back. We need to go back to an America that invested in youth and afforded them the same opportunities I had. We have purposely robbed wealth from old people to make sure, from young people to make sure that old people stay rich. America used to be the best place to get rich. It's now the best place to stay rich.
Wow. Yeah.
That was a rant. No light. That was a slow rainstorm. That wasn't a lightning round.
That was amazing. Okay, a couple of things before I let you go. Scott, we have a segment called Shoot Your Shot. So we'd like to know, what is your moonshot idea? This is your biggest ambition, your wildest dream. It could be professional, personal. Very quickly, shoot your shot.
Selfishly, I'd like to own the Glasgow Rangers. I'd like to own my father grew up watching the Rangers in Glasgow. I would just think it'd be a ton of fun. I really want to be, but meaningfully, I want to play a role. I want to be an evangelist for the well-being of young men who I think are struggling as a cohort. Nobody feels sorry for them because they've had a 400-year head start. 4 times more likely to be addicted, 3 times more likely to commit suicide, 12 times more likely to be incarcerated. I think young men are struggling in our nation, and I want to be, if I can do anything to slightly nod to all the wonderful men in my life who are not related to me, who took an interest in my life and really meant a lot to me. I want to figure out a way to kind of do the same thing and nod to them.
All right. Last thing, Scott, is a fun little game. It's called Business Battle Royale. So I made this up. So I'm going to present you with 2 things. It could be a person, a business, an entity, and they're battling each other. And you have to tell me whose side you're on and who ultimately wins, okay? Okay. So the first one is a battle that I don't know why, but I'm obsessed with it. I think it's so interesting. It's Apple versus Epic Games. So for context for our listeners, Epic Games, the maker of Fortnite, had sued Apple in 2020 for not letting Epic Games use its own payments platform because it's trying to circumnavigate Apple taking a 30% cut essentially in revenue, because that's what it does for apps in its app store. So Scott Galloway, whose side are you on? The app developers or Apple?
100% Epic. And by the way, disclosure, I own shares in Apple and I own shares in Epic. I invested in Epic. Apple abuses its monopoly power, 30% tax in the App Store. Spotify is a superior music service, but Apple is now growing faster than Spotify in the US because Apple can institute a 30% tax because it has monopoly control of our handsets, not ship tools to Spotify. Absolutely Epic. You got to be on the side of Epic.
With Epic and the app developers. All right, next one. I know you have thoughts on this. Twitter versus Elon Musk. Again, for our listeners, the context, not that you don't know the context, listeners, but here it is anyway. Elon Musk had proposed buying Twitter. Then his team had cited reasons to call off the acquisition. Supposedly, the deal is back on as of this recording. Today is Wednesday, October 12th. But Scott, you said on your podcast that this still doesn't mean it's a done deal. So I guess the whose side you're on could mean a lot of things in this case. A, do you hope the deal goes through? And B, if it does, who is the winner? Do users win? Is Elon Musk the only winner? Interpret winning as you so please.
Sure. So what I think will happen, and I think it's a good thing, is I think the deal will close under the auspices of Elon Musk having to provide a deposition, which he doesn't want to do because he has lied so much that committing perjury scares the shit out of him and his lawyers. So I'm hoping the deal closes. I think the Chancery Court is not amused. And I think his lawyers have said to him, boss, you're going to lose. You're all wet here. And so they keep trying to delay an obfuscation. So I hope it closes. I think it will. I don't think Twitter is a national treasure. I think we should have laws such that it doesn't matter who owns it. I think Elon is very creative. If he does figure out interesting things around payment, subscription, or super app, I think there could be a big unlock there. He's overpaying by about $30 billion. He shows up and he's down 60%. If he hadn't come in, Twitter stock would be somewhere between $10 and $20 based on the performance of its peer group. The biggest winners here, hands down, are if it's enforced as rule of law, that's important. But the really biggest winners here are Twitter shareholders get to sell their shares in a company for $54.20 of a company that's worth probably $12 to $15 a share.
Wow. Do you think he'll be able to turn Twitter into the super app that he wants to turn it into, like a WeChat?
I think there's a decent opportunity there because his background's in payments. First of all, he's brilliant, and his background is in payments. Started a company that got sold to PayPal. So I've always thought the opportunity for Twitter is one around more moderation, subscription, and to try and become the WeChat, as you've said, and use it as a platform for payments. So. But his investors in here are probably going to lose a shit ton of money. I mean, it's like when I bought a house in the UK for cash, I moved in. I moved to London once. The Queen dies and the pound drops 20%. When I moved into my house, I was down 20% just because of the devaluation of the pound. When he moves into Twitter, when he owns Twitter and it closes, he's down 60% from day one. Massively overpaid. And that's why he's been trying every which way but loose to try and get out of this deal because he knows he's massively overpaid for this thing.
Yeah. All right, final business battle royale matchup. This is social media. TikTok versus Instagram versus BeReal versus any other social media platform besides Twitter. Whose side are you on, i.e. which do you think is maybe the least harmful? And then secondarily, who do you think wins? And by that I mean, let's say who gets the majority of Gen Z and Gen Alpha attention in the next 10 years?
If you had to bet on one, it's probably YouTube. It's well run. It actually commands more time people under the age of 18 than TikTok. But TikTok commands more time of people under the age of 18 than all streaming media platforms combined. I think Google has benefited from the mendacious behavior of Meta, and as a result, YouTube hasn't received the scrutiny it should. It still is radicalizing young men. I think Meta has shown itself to be incredibly mendacious and a group of people. I think Meta is actually a net negative for society. I think all of the rest of big tech has its issues but are net positives. I do think Meta is at this point a net negative. And I'd like to see substantially more criminal civil action against Meta.
Scott, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for joining us on Business Casual.
Thank you, Nora. I love Morning Brew. I read it every morning.
Woohoo!
Love it.
Love to hear it. This is Business Casual, and I'm Nora Ali. You can follow me on Twitter at Nora K. Ali. That's Nora, the letter K, Ali. And I would love to hear from you. If you have ideas for episodes, comments, and thoughts on episodes you loved, fun segment ideas, just shoot me a DM and I will do my very best to respond. You can also reach the BC team by emailing businesscasual@morningbrew.com or call us. That number is 862-295-1135. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Business Casual on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And if you like the show, please leave a rating and a review. It really helps us. Business Casual is produced by Catherine Millsop, Olivia Mead, and Raymond Liu. Additional production, sound design, and mixing by Daniel Marcus. Kate Brandt is our fact checker, and A.B. Silver is our senior booking producer. Sebastian Vega edits our videos. Our VP of Multimedia is Sarah Singer. Music in this episode from Daniel Marcus and the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. Thanks for listening to Business Casual. I'm Nora Ali. Keep it business and keep it casual.
Business Casual.
If you like what you saw and you like what you heard, you can listen to the entire episode of this podcast, Business Casual, anywhere you get your podcasts. And please go ahead and subscribe to the Morning Brew YouTube channel and go ahead and click on that alarm bell, that thing right there, so you can be alerted anytime there's a new video.